Hi, everyone. This is Adam Singer, your host of the AdQuick Madvertising podcast. And I'm excited today to have Lee Odden on as this week's guest. He is CEO of TopRank Online Marketing. He is one of the original online marketing bloggers and someone who pioneered the SEO space, the social media marketing space, and has been just basically one of the industry luminaries since the early 2000s. Lee is like one of the original online marketers. He's probably partly a reason why all of us are doing online marketing. I actually am very lucky in that I got to work for Lee's company, TopRank, for a number of years on the account side, managing really cool companies from startups to Fortune 500, as well as I've sat on the other side of the table and been a client and had Lee's team run my programs in tech. So I know Lee and his team really well. I've been a reader of the online marketing blog forever. So I'm super excited to speak with Lee. Lee, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thanks for having me, Adam. You know what OG really stands for? It stands for old guy. So I'm happy though. I'm happy with the opportunity to have worked in this space for a long time, to see things advance, innovate, elevate. It's been a pleasure to see you and on your journey and all the amazing things that you've been able to do working for, was it Lewis and Google and lots of other places, and actually be able to work with you, not only at TopRank, as you mentioned, but also on the client side. It's been pretty cool.
Yeah, thank you, Lee. And I think there's probably more people who don't get the pleasure of getting to work for you who've like read one of your blog posts, or seen one of your talks at a conference or something and been inspired. I think the online marketing industry is cool because we're so open about sharing ideas and case studies that you really never know what you're going to share online and how it's going to actually affect the world. I don't think that's true necessarily in other areas, like finance and law, although you'll note that the lawyers and the financial professionals who do publish online tend to get back the same benefits that people like yourself realized early on from being an online marketer. So I think as you get more and more into your profession and you care more, you start to appreciate the notion of online tools for connection, because at the end of the day, like if I needed a lawyer, hopefully I don't need one, I would want to use one who I've read thoughts of online and they cared enough to share about their sector.
Yeah, I think, that's interesting, because the investment that people make when they're following sort of this give to get approach to creating value in the marketplace, people don't always know that they're going to get a return, but the right reason is that, they've got something to share. They've got a journey that they're on. And, why not share some of the things, some of the insights, some of the hypotheses and outcomes that you're experiencing as you're going through that journey. And it's really not just multidisciplinary. It's possible to be multidisciplinary in terms of how you publish and interact with people, but it's also something that's applicable to pretty much any industry, right? Whether you're a musician like yourself, or someone who's prolific as with commentary on all things marketing and PR, like yourself, all the way to some of the other industries that we interact with. And the thing is, I say this a lot, we're in an age of information overload, right? And with AI and everything, contributing to a lot of people's content creation and the call for content marketing, all that stuff, there's just so much to choose from. And so increasingly people are looking for trusted voices. And so it's really awesome when people are in a particular industry and they make that investment, they make that commitment, and they bring people along with them on that journey of exploration and discovery and learning and insight. Really makes whatever industry that is a better place.
I agree. And you mentioned the importance of people behind content. And we just had Lily on the podcast. She's world-renowned SEO in New York. You know her. And
Yes.
she had mentioned that one of her predictions for search was actually going to be a further biasing to people and experts. So it's not just, okay, this blog said something, or this industry trade or this company said something, but who was it that said that wrote that story and said that thing. So I think that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, you know, way back when people talked about things like author rank, I don't think that was really a real thing or not. But I've been followed Lily Ray for a long time, and her EAT expertise is something everyone should be tapping into right now. And I totally agree with her. Interesting for our. So I have an agency, TopRank, and a lot of what we're doing is content centric. A lot of it is about credible content, not just optimized for discovery, but optimized for credibility. And so that's an investment in creating relationships and content and partnership with people who are already trusted and respected in an industry on a particular subject matter. And so, you know, things like obviously someone publishing content on their blog and through social and earned media about a particular topic makes them influential about that idea. But there's the translation to search there too. You know, are they recognized as an entity? You know, do they get those expanded search results when someone searches on them as an individual? And wow, if they, you know, are really achieving a high degree of affinity towards a particular topic, you know, there's really some benefit to be gained by being associated with that person. And so what we're seeing a lot more of, and I mean, not just in the last 6 months, I'm talking about the last 6 years plus, is, and especially in B2B, partnerships with true industry experts, not just people with a lot of fans, friends, and followers, but true industry experts, people who are published, people who are, you know, speaking and authoring books and doing all the sorts of things that manifest their intelligence and credibility and competence in a particular subject matter area, who are also capable of attracting an audience and engaging with that audience. More and more brands are partnering with folks like that. It adds credibility to the content because you have this outside expertise. It contributes to thought leadership because sometimes the brand ideas are validated by that third-party expert. And you're also adding channels of distribution because obviously if these people have expertise and there are people who follow them, their collaboration with the brand on something that's really valuable is going to be something that they are going to want to share with their audience and their community. And so therefore that brand message reaches an audience that's probably ignoring other forms of information. And it's really an everybody wins sort of situation.
Yeah, and I've watched you do a lot of B2B influencer relations, influencer marketing, which I think I'm super excited to see that because I recall years ago it was like pulling teeth to get B2B and technology companies to do much with individuals. They would throw money at surveys and research reports and white papers, but you would mention, you know, something as simple as doing doing like a Twitter chat, right? As an example, just one tactic. And they'd be like, well, wait, why would my company even want to participate on social? Social's not going to get me any leads. And of course, that has been shown to be completely untrue. You know, I'm sure many leads to TopRank themselves is from social marketing, which, you know, shows those are B2B sales, that your relationship there is at least partly helpful and attributable to someone trusting you as an agency, knowing that you're going to do a great job with their brand. And it's certainly a proof point.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, you're making me think of our largest client, not just in terms of company size, but what we do for them, found a tweet by Lane Ellis, our blog editor and our social media manager. And he just tweeted something out. She followed Lane and she thought, and she started clicking through and started reading about the agency and and fast forward, you know, 4 years or 3 years or whatever. And now, you know, they're one of the largest companies in the world. And we're doing, you know, some really great things with them. And the, you know, I don't know if it's last touch, but, you know, one of those points of credibility, points of interaction, discovery, engagement was social.
I think that in a lot of cases for tech, sort of things that are first in the toy phase, quote unquote, just aren't taken seriously by the enterprise. And I think that social, that could be something like AR and VR. Like, I actually think that did start in the toy phase with the Oculus. I think the metaverse is silly, but actually the really interesting thing could be, like, imagine you could train a surgeon or something on AR or
Sure.
VR glasses. And so I think that's a very common thing because it has to start fairly simple. It's just interesting because there's people like yourself who you believed in the power of the internet early, and no one really had to sell you on using like social or the internet for leads. So that's one thing that I've been like, one of the bright spots for me as a marketer is we've been trying to educate, CMOs and CEOs and CFOs on the power of this for a long time. And I don't think we have to do that here. I actually think at this point it's more of a, like, how should it be done, which is good. We're not having to
Sure.
have slides showing like there's a billion users on this platform. Well, why would you want to connect with a billion users, right? I kind of think there's also with this one problem that I've seen, and we can get into this as little or as much as you want since you focus mostly on B2B, but I've seen cases in consumer where a not thought through influencer strategy has backfired on them. And
Sure.
so an example of that recently is the Bud Light campaign. And
Yeah.
politics totally aside, I don't even care about the politics of it. The creative is ultimately why there was backlash. I legitimately think if that creative was done differently, maybe even with the same person, just with different guidelines behind it, it would have been better. And
Yeah.
the way that it was done, I think ultimately these aren't bad tactics for brands, but they have to be done in such a way that's thoughtful. Like if an entire like cohort of people, you can hate them or love them, it doesn't matter, suddenly is angry at you, you failed as a marketer. That is not your job.
Right. Right. It's interesting. I was at a conference listening to one of our clients, Takia Burt, who manages the LinkedIn Marketing Solutions blog, and other things. And she was talking about, from a DE&I perspective, how brands can kind of step on it by paying lip service or tokenism or whatever. That's a category of failure, I guess, in that realm. But it can happen in terms of just bad creative too, right? And the idea was that she was talking about is like, look, don't you want your customers to see themselves in your content, right? And so, okay, yeah, that's reasonable. Now, what are some of the steps we can take? What are think about collaboration with people that represent your audience. What does your marketing team look like, right? Are there voices in your marketing team that represent insight into the audience that you're actually after, and things like that, right? And so I guess maybe it boils down to, sometimes, can you make sure you check with some educated individuals before you hit publish that, this is the sort of thing that could actually be effective. Maybe it is clever, but we want it to be effective. We want it to be meaningful, right? Not get people pissed off.
Yeah, I think in a lot of cases, companies are doing something because an agency, not an agency like yours, but one of these larger shops gets a wild hair to do something, or thinks it's a a checkbox. Everyone has to do something with TikTok or whatever. So then they are
Right.
like, oh, okay, well, we're checking this box. And I think those strategies and those tactics may have been nothing burgers in a previous time frame. Like, I think a lot of the metaverse stuff ended up being nothing burgers, and then they have to make a big show of it and say, oh, this was an experiment. I'm like, well, you spent $3 million on an experiment, so congrats. But I think in these cases, if you're a little bit with social influencer marketing, you are playing with fire if you don't know what you're doing. And the thing is that that's not to say don't do it, because it's super effective with the right people. It's, you have to know what you're doing. And I think that the cohort of management that sort of wants to treat it like just like it's advertising, where you throw a bunch of money at some display ads and don't think of it again, they're wrong. It's not how you would run such a program.
Yeah. Well, there's this idea of collaborative marketing or participative marketing, where you start to involve people who represent your customers in the marketing creation itself. So, that harkens back to user-generated content, involving your employees, so internal subject matter experts. And, we do a lot more, and seeing a lot more of that in interest in surfacing the influence and fostering influence within the company, within the brand, but also partnering with external experts. And so you have this sort of collaborative mindset that provides some checks and balances of validity and relevance to the way that you're communicating, the messages you're using, and ultimately to effectiveness, right? And I think there's a lot of opportunity for companies to break through this sort of status quo campaign mindset and to start to think about, with empathy, who their audiences are and what are the collaboration opportunities to create something that would really truly be useful, meaningful, and effective, as opposed to marketing operating not really in a silo, but kind of idea generation and maybe trying to win an award or get something slid in under budget right before the quarter closes or whatever.
So we've talked a bit about like large brands and enterprises. There's a lot of startups that listen to this podcast in particular. A lot of young, growth hungry teams and marketers. Can you speak a little bit to, because you have clients of all sizes. If I'm like a resource constrained team, how should I at least broadly think about social and content in like the highest possible return for my time? If I'm in growth mode, I'm building the company, I only have so many hours to dedicate.
Yeah, I guess the first thing I'd look at is having a really clear definition of who you are and your value prop, and make sure that is consistently communicated through the social profiles and the other destination that you're going to drive traffic to. Right? Have a compelling offer. But in terms of reaching or connecting with opportunities efficiently, because we're in sort of this do more with less age right now, right? At a minimum, I'd be using social media monitoring software to identify opportunities to engage with people who are raising their hand right now. So I literally I do this now, right? And well, I wouldn't say I'm resource constrained, but I'm not sitting on an unlimited budget either, right? And but I am time constrained, right? Because as a CEO, I have lots of other things I need to be doing than to finding new customers. But I do this. So people who are actually asking questions that would be an indication of commercial interest in what it is that you do, like in my case or our case, how many, someone might literally post to a forum, post to a public channel, social media channel. It's like, hey, does anybody know a good marketing agency? Anybody know a B2B marketing agency? Anybody know a marketing agency that does B2B influence or whatever? And I can see that. I'm gonna say, well, as a matter of fact, I mean, that's a simple thing to do. Now, if you're, so if you're selling widgets, if you're selling, small commercial items, that's probably not what you're probably not going to try and sell at that level. But, if there are people saying, hey, anybody know where I can get bulk orders of portable, AirPods or whatever? I mean, I'm clearly I'm not a very creative person. I'm not coming up with really cool examples right now, but the point is listen for opportunities. There are social technologies that you can use to listen for opportunities, and you can engage right now. And I can't tell you how many times this has happened over the last 10 years for us as an agency, but it's certainly something BDRs or SDRs could be doing. Or if you don't even have those, it just, whoever's responsible for the sales function could be using social media listening software to connect with people who are raising their hand in a commercial way, right? The other thing, of course, is creating content that answers buyers' questions. So distribution of that content could be through the social channels where those buyers may exist. And if the social channel has advertising options, you can find out through, I don't know, it's not like you're going to do a apples to apples ICP comparison, right? But you can get a sense for whether your customers are functioning or active on a particular social channel by looking at the advertising characteristics for that social channel. And then you can think about putting up content that it has some utility for the buyer that is not at the top of the funnel, but is at maybe middle stage or later stage, right? And you're throwing hooks out into the water of something that would be very interesting to them to help them make decisions, something that has utility, maybe something that's provocative and, challenging, but then points them in your direction. And then the last thing I think of is like, gosh, if if there are people that are influential in your industry that are fans, find a way to collaborate with them in some way. If there are people in your community that are already saying great things about your brand, about your company, about your products, find ways to collaborate with them and more intentionally help them get the good news out there, that can help you capture some of that goodwill and warm market coming back to you so you can sell them.
I love it, and I like the notion of providing content that's like at the mid part of the funnel, for example, where you're going to, you're not necessarily just like fully industry, you're just a blogger to share information, but you're actually trying to show how your product might be used a little bit, because I think a lot of professionals are using social and they want to do their job better, so why not meet them at that intersection? So speaking of provocative, we have it seems we have like a little bit of a bifurcation of CEOs on social. So we have people like yourself and people like Aaron Levy, CEO of Box, who are phenomenal at social. Like, you're tweeting and sharing on LinkedIn and blogging about marketing. Aaron is sharing his thoughts on cloud and AI. It's really interesting. Like, if I was a potential cloud, cloud docs buyer, I would definitely raise my hand and go to, Aaron's company for help. I know they really care. And then at the other end, we seem to have, people like Elon and some of the other kind of characters in some of the other spaces that have decided, well, the algos are going to reward me for saying weird things or, doing silly stuff. So if I'm like a marketing VP or I'm a comms person, do I want my CEO posting online? Do I have to train them, or is that something they're going to have to want to do for it to be effective? How should I think about managing like my management team?
Yeah, like I thought you were secret. Like, how would you manage Elon Musk and his social? Like you're
Would
not.
not
You just
try.
you just don't bother. Obviously, I think if you communicate the end states that are achievable, provided according to how the CEO functions on social, they'll get it, right? So if you can connect their behavior on social to business objectives and show them, okay, here's a couple of ways in which you could achieve that or you could contribute to that, it's going to make sense to them. And that'd be my way of directing them or giving them guidance or whatever. You've got to lead with what's in it for them, what's in it for the business, because ultimately any CEO is going to care about growth for the business, right? Of course, the other consideration is ego. And so if you can show how these sort of manifestations of ego on social how the activities that you want them to do will contribute to greater personal visibility, well, that's going to motivate them as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of the senior executive engagement that we do is based on, if I oversimplified, I'd say ego and greater good. And so, and you have to learn, well, what is motivating for the person, and that dictates how you communicate with them. It dictates the opportunities that you share with them in terms of how they might choose to leverage the platform or use the platform.
Yeah, I think that's great. And so, like, one of the reasons I was so excited to work for you is I had read so many of your thoughts online, and I'm like, Lee is awesome. He legit cares about the industry. He cares about human beings. I would like to work for this man. So, like, I think that the signal that you put out there as a leader, like in terms of the side of the equation where it's like, it's obvious you care about the industry and the world. I think if you can do it that way, it's like zero risk. It's no risk. And I think the risk comes in when you have someone, who decides they like being a provocateur for the sake of it. Like, you're not running a podcast, where you're running a company, unless you're in marketing, and that's different. But the point is, like, I think it's either it's like, I like what you said about using ego as a motivator, but also, in check. I think you don't want a situation where, like, not even Elon, but there's certain other CEOs we won't name in Silicon Valley who have said things, and later on, years later, when they IPO'd, that tweet or that update was later put on CNBC. And like, that's the last thing you should want if like your company grows and you're going to do that later. So, despite what some people say about wanting to work for an Elon or letting him say what they want, I don't agree personally. I think like having your execs trained appropriately if they're not like internet natives. I think if you are an internet native and you became a CEO, like if I was a CEO one day and I took a company public, good luck going through like I probably have a million Reddit posts. Like have fun, like really have a good time. It's too late for me, but for other people, it can be different.
Yeah, it's interesting. We the interest in helping executives at companies has increased quite a bit with their social, and so sometimes it's not just that executive that is putting that information out there. It may be something that was drafted and then they, put the finishing touch on it and they go ahead and publish because it's part of a strategy, to make that executive more relevant on certain topics, to facilitate relationships between that executive and certain people in the marketplace that make sense, whether it's customers or other people in the same organization or people in the media. These things can be architected, or they can be augmented through data, through insights that are specific to the social channels. And so you have this interesting art science scenario where it's like, look, executive, be yourself. And we have to kind of deconstruct, well, what does yourself look like? And how does that reconcile with what the brand's trying to achieve or what we're trying to achieve here? And that is the plan. That is the, that is the DNA for the actions that are taken in terms of content that is, created, promoted, engaged with, and so forth, and ultimately measured, so that we know that we're on the right track.
Totally. So speaking of measured, how are you thinking about social measurement? Because as we both know, social suffers from the same measurement challenge of PR, which is you or I could, read a story about a brand or see a company at a conference. And then later, God forbid, we Google that brand and convert and buy from a Google search. So that, the actual work got no credit, no attribution. So yeah. I'm curious how TopRank thinks of this problem. Is it part education, part analytics, part faith-based, as our friend Avinash likes to say? I think there's probably some of that. But what are you thinking about from a framework perspective?
Yeah, it's an education process. It's also, the faith really is augmented by correlation, right? And I know you're a deep, you have deep capabilities when it comes to analytics. So if we have a social initiative happening and we do an overlay on, interactions with commercial content, we can't say there's a causation situation happening here, but if we track this over time, we start to see parity of these spikes that are occurring. Now, and we can use that as part of how we report on the effectiveness of social. Other correlations outside of just traffic to web pages and things, landing pages and things of that nature, are tracking affinity through social conversations. On the influence side, especially, we might identify 50 people who are the most important voices in a category, and we'll do a benchmark measurement of to what degree are they talking about a particular brand, to what degree are they talking about certain topics that are important to the brand. And then, marketing campaigns and influencer engagement and lots of other collaborations are executed, and at different touch points, we're going to go ahead and measure that share of voice, or that the degree to which that group of the most important voices in the industry for that category are increasingly mentioning the brand in terms of sentiment or in terms of the other topics that the brand wants to be known for. And the assumption there, of course, is that if the people that, the industry listen to are talking increasingly about that brand in the context of how the brand wants to be known, can we correlate that with some of the increases in other activities, like whether it's organic search, whether it's direct link traffic, or whether it's even to earned media, right? So it's not always a direct A to B to C line. Sometimes you've got a bit of fuzziness happening there, and you got to do the best you can.
Yeah, we do something similar with our product at AdQuick, where since we're measuring out of home, right? It's not like you can click a billboard. We show search
But that would be
brand.
cool.
It would be cool. You know what's interesting is because of the pandemic, QR codes actually became a thing. So pre-pandemic, people like knew what they were, but they never scanned. But now that the entire world was scanning QR codes on menus, etc., now they see one and they actually will scan it. So like the pandemic gave birth to like or rebirth a sort of dead technology. I think we'd all written off QR codes.
Yes.
And they were used in APAC. But now that we've created the habit, people will in fact scan a QR code. Coinbase is one of the companies that took advantage of this for their Super Bowl ad, right?
Mhm.
So it's like, it's one of those things
interesting.
where you have to like reassess your priors. Like things, one thing that bothers me as a marketer still is I still find people who think things never change. I'm like, what are you talking about? The only thing that happens in marketing is change. How
Exactly.
things never change? Like what world do you live in? So, yeah, the QR code thing. But we do brand lift, and I think the other thing for startups in particular, if you're or even a big company, I think you kind of know the tactics that you're running in a given time frame. So like you mentioned, I'm a analytics guy. I think a reasonable person can look at analytics after a campaign ran and understand if you're doing better on the quantitative side. And then on the qualitative side, another thing that I do is for B2B is I ask a simple question. I have my sales team ask a simple question. How did you hear about us? You don't need to ask how did you first hear about us or last hear about us, because that doesn't matter. The thing they say is what matters, because they'll tell you the thing that mattered. I actually got I hired some people to clear the land in Texas outside of Boston. We just bought a home, and I heard about them from a CTV streaming ad, and then I got remarketed to them online because I was like looking at YouTube videos. And I told them I heard of you. Their CTV video ad was awesome, and I told them. They were like, "Oh, thank you. We run them hyper local." I'm like, "It's so smart." But I closed the feedback loop for them. But like I only really remembered that one ad. So you don't even need to ask like the attribution point. Just say, how did you hear about us? They'll tell you every time. If they navigated to your site from Google, they won't tell you that. They'll tell you, oh, I met Jim at a conference. They're not going to say Google. It's like not how people think. So getting some qualitative, I think, can help too.
That's a great point.
The other thing for any organic marketing that I've been trying to stress more of with everyone is like social and search are similar in that it's all compounding. So if you're like building a brand and you have like 6 months of doing I think it's true for anything online. Like if you want ads, if you want results in 6 months, run ads, and that's it. Don't do influencer, don't do search, don't do any of these tactics where it's like the systems of the internet aren't set up to reward anyone who just shows up today, right?
Yeah, for sure. And where there are established channels of distribution, and there can be immediacy in terms of entering that channel, that's like an ad, right? That's your opportunity. And I would say on the B2B side, well, and this consumer too, I suppose, but increasingly you can do this with influencers who, on the B2B side, there are a lot more pro influencers who have established podcasts, established networks, social networks, but also networks with other people that you can buy into. And so it's kind of interesting, the perceived impact of that disclaimer, this is an advertisement, versus what an ad normally looks like, has on buyer behavior. And really what it comes down to is the content valuable. If they're just shilling for somebody on a podcast where they normally would not do that, well, obviously that's going to be ignored and create some problems probably for the credibility of that influencer. But if they regularly have sort of a mini review of some kind of software or whatever, and it's sponsored, but it's thoughtful and actually useful, well, then that community is used to receiving that information, and it's all good, right? It's all good. So channels of distribution that are established, whether it's an ad buy or whether it's an influencer or an email list, out of home, whatever, like where there's a mechanism that's already established for that kind of communication is absolutely your opportunity for the short term.
So, Lee, you look at a lot of different companies and industries in the B2B space, and I haven't sat in your shoes in the consulting world for a while. But a question I like to ask consultants still to like understand a bit more: what do you see as kind of the current biggest blind spot that B2B marketers are missing right now?
It's kind of interesting. My roots are in SEO and organic search. That's how I got into the marketing field in the late 90s. And there has been this sort of fluctuation over the years of attention paid to the opportunity of what I like to say being the best answer for your customer at the very moment they need you, right? And so a lot of B2B brands, and this translates to the answer to your question, the gap, a lot of B2B brands have gotten caught up in the campaign mindset. They've gotten caught up into the fiscal limitation of only being able to budget for 3 months, start and stop, and then start a new thing again. And looking at tactics that satisfy that kind of fiscal and budgeting constraint. And I think that's a big gap. I think the idea of always on marketing is a huge opportunity. So that manifests in terms of SEO, meaning that you're following a strategy that produces useful content specific to the intent of the people that you're after, not their demographic information, not anything else, but to their intent. You're creating utility through content, and ultimately, hopefully, that gets rewarded through higher organic visibility. But you're also doing that always-on activity, right? Through social. You're executing always-on relationship building, and this again, kind of runs contrary to the idea of like, well, we've got to stop at the end of the quarter, and these are things that you need to be doing on an ongoing basis, and the effect is cumulative, right? You have a fixed cost allocation to most of these activities, but the upside is that the longer you do them, the more footprint you have out there in the world, the more links, the more web pages as entry points through organic search, the more social conversations and relationships that you have over time, and you don't have to spend a whole bunch more money to scale. You just have to stick with it over time, and so I think that's a big gap. It's not something that's going to win the day in the short term, but in the long term, it sure as heck does.
Awesome. I love that answer. I think that like really what you said is marketers basically need to be more strategic because there's like a lot of them still think too tactically. And I agree.
Yeah.
Another question I had for you specifically, because you're in a unique situation in that, well, I think you guys are early adopters here. TopRank used to be a physical company, but I think you guys actually were distributed years before the pandemic and running a distributed team. I'm curious, any advice for companies where I guess they went distributed in the pandemic? They're not certain if they're going to go back. They kind of have a hybrid situation. It doesn't feel like the same team they once had. What are some of your, I guess, beyond just project management, what can a company do to have a better culture in a distributed environment? Because I think TopRank has done a great job with this. And all my interactions with your team is all, motivated, acts like a team. Like you guys seem to be running the show really well. So what wisdom could you impart the rest of the world?
Well, it's definitely a different world. And you're right. The DNA of our organization was distributed for the first 5 or 6 years. And then we went to an office, and then we got a much larger commercial office. And then the COVID hit, and we let that go. So, I think one of the big takeaways is shared experiences. If you can create shared experiences amongst your team, you create a sense of teamwork. We're in this together. One of the things that we think about when we're hiring people, we're not just hiring people, but as far as someone who is moving up, have they been to war? You know what I mean? Have they gone through a challenging experience and come out the other side, with more wisdom as opposed to despair. And when you're in a virtual environment, it's really important to be cognizant of the communications necessary to, reap the reward of facing those challenges. Because when you're in an office and it's like, oh, hey, there's a fire, we need a little tiger team put together or do a sprint. Let's solve this problem. You're all together physically. You're in the same room. Let's meet in my office every day at 2:00, and we'll get this squared away in a week. You can't do that same thing in a virtual world. You can do it differently though. And so creating opportunities for, collaboration and especially again, shared experiences, whether they're virtual or in person is really important. You got to have a vision for what holds us all together. And you've got to be thoughtful about communicating how anyone's individual role and how a team's role lines up with that big picture vision. And you've got to use, whatever's at your disposal. In my case, when COVID was starting to chill, I started a little series of coffee with Lee meetings. So I went and met with everyone that was in Minneapolis for coffee. And this is the first time they had met with another person from TopRank since before COVID. So I started doing things like that, right? We had a TopRank summit last summer. We flew people from 9 different states, which is where our company is now, into Minnesota, and had a 2 or 3 day little mini conference where we did some strategic planning and training and development and just fun stuff like the famous pontoon meeting with a little happy hour at Lord Fletcher's, if you know what that means. So I think it's really important to have some clear sight, clear articulation of what that big picture vision is for your organization, and then find opportunities to connect with people virtually, and find ways to take advantage of those shared experiences that you can create. So we're all in this together, we're accomplishing something together, and then we're bonded together.
I love that. And I also really like the notion of even in the distributed world, still seeing your team. So pre-pandemic, I was with a company called Invite for about a year, and they were distributed from day one. And basically, the business function was globally, and we'd come in once a quarter for QBRs, get together, do planning, brainstorming, things that you would want to do in person, and then go and ship the work. And that worked really well. We had shared OKRs, shared metrics. And I think that the organization and structure and process around like some in-person time was very beneficial. I felt that team was more functional than some of my in-person teams that I had maybe on the big company side. Won't name any names.
Yeah.
But so I also think a lot of when I hear people share, I think the mission's so important, because I think the companies without mission, they're probably terminal zeros anyway. Like, it's not online and offline. Like, they're probably in trouble if they're not going to keep people motivated. Like, you're not extra motivated because you're going to an office every day. You're extra motivated because you're like, oh, these are cool clients or cool projects. And that's a sustainable thing. Anything else, you're not going to, you're probably not even going to last a year somewhere. You're definitely going to burn out. So I think that shared team mission, whatever that is super important. One of the things I really liked, if you are an agency side person, we definitely have lots of agency people, is you're the cool hired gun. You're the not Archer. Who's the guy? Michael Weston from Burn Notice. He's like the spy who comes in and like fixes the problems. Like you get to go in and do the things that the big company like either can't see or can't do very well, and it's cool, right? You're the hired gun, and that's a fun job.
For a lot of brand people, that meeting with their agency is the funnest thing they get to do that week.
Oh, 100%. And yeah, it's a cool thing too, because you give, a really good consultant is truthful. Like, when you see things that are dysfunctional inside the company, you got to tell your client contact that, because if it's like existentially bad, that client contact might not have a job soon. So you sort of have to help them navigate what's going on.
Yeah, for sure. And that's part of the relationship too, right? Being able to skillfully communicate those sorts of things, so, with empathy for their situation. the brand person's situation. Like it's not like they can go change the world tomorrow, especially if it's a large, slow moving organization, but you can give them insight, maybe even empower them with things that they could do, give them options, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I have a question for you. I don't think you probably get asked enough. I think everyone, good agency people know how to be a good consultant. How do brand marketers be a good client?
Well, that's a great question. I think one of the most important things is clarity of objectives. Clarity about the why we're doing this thing. Because without that clarity, that's where things get derailed. That's where scope creep comes into play. That's where peers in your organization start to second guess you, and you don't have a solid position to stand on for the direction or even the investment that you've made. So I think that's one of the most important things. Also, I think outside of clarity, being open-minded. Now, I know a lot of companies come to us and they're expecting super, super creative ideas. Not all of them, but a lot of them are. They're looking to be pushed, and that's what they're paying for. And then other companies, they're just looking for exactly to a certain specification. And to be a good client, you've got to know what kind of agency you're working with. So if you need creative ideas, go to a more creative agency. If you're just looking for someone to check boxes and be sort of like a external FTE or group of full-time hires, and just complete tasks, then go to that kind of agency or service. But try and think about and reflect on what kind of engagement and work do you actually need done. And the last thing I would say is measurement. I can't tell you how valuable, revenue level measurement is to the agency, so it can know whether the things it was doing were actually effective. And unfortunately, this just isn't available in a lot of cases. So maybe there's ways to be creative to provide category level or broad level metrics that can help the agency understand from a performance standpoint whether the kinds of things they're doing are effective, so that at least they know, but more importantly, so they can optimize performance.
Yeah, and one of the reasons I really like you guys, and really any boutique agency, and by boutique I mean not 1,000-person
Right.
big shop,
No,
is
that's us.
one of the things I saw at when I was in-house at Google is I was given agency resource from one of the big agencies. We'll leave it at that. I'm not going to name names. And someone who's clearly paid 6 figures a year, very smart person, was within this box of very specific things that they could do for me. And I wanted them to even think a little bit outside, and they would they're like this was a smart individual. It was clearly beaten into him not to do anything but the thing that they were given to me scope to do. I even had more budget, and they couldn't figure out, I'm like, I can give you more money for this. I ultimately had to find another resource. But that's different than the boutique agency where I could tell a TopRank AE, I have this problem. They'd either do it and just get it done, or they'd be like, all right, well, here's a contract. We'll get this kickoff next week.
Change order or whatever.
We'll get it done. And it's so interesting because I'd never been at a big agency. I'd only been at a TopRank type agency where it was like, you are sort of MacGyvering stuff where it needs to be done. You have a process and you have a scope, but you're also, you're in service of the client. And it was just interesting to me to see the difference of it. And you'd think at a really big company with a really big scope, you'd get someone who wasn't just such a linear thinker. But that's not the case.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's important too. It's funny. I was just having a conversation with one of our account team members today about the value of being proactive and actually introducing new ideas, even whether they're in scope or not. Just as hey, I'm noticing this thing happening in the industry, wanted to let you know. And here's some implications that might have for your responsibility, your function, your department, your division, BU, business. And they can choose to do something about that or not. They can choose to make choices that don't involve the agency. Awesome. they could decide to make choices that do involve the agency to help them address that new idea or that observation. That's awesome too. But being proactive is super important, I think, in a consulting relationship, because the last thing in the world you want is for a client themselves to notice something's happening, and then they have to go to the agency and say, "Did you notice this new thing?" And the
Yeah.
agency's like, "I have no idea what you're talking about."
And ultimately, I think the risk of being this very mechanical box checker agency, it's not outsourcing to somewhere cheaper. It's AI. Like, I'm going to have ChatGPT do that thing.
Yeah.
So I think any agency that's listening here, whether you're an out-of-home agency or a digital agency, I think really you need to be thought of as a real strategic partner, and as someone who I think for any of your clients, I think, and Lee, you can tell me if this is asking too much of AEs, but I think they need to understand the business. I think they need to not just understand, okay, I'm shipping emails for you or running, billboards or whatever. Like, I think they need the broader context of the business, the company, the industry.
Yeah, it's a really important exercise when onboarding a client to create that profile and create that brief about the client, not just a creative brief, but understanding the client's business. And a lot of times that doesn't happen at depth. And if you don't do that right off the bat and add to it incrementally over time, the busyness that is the nature of an account manager's job is not going to allow them to create or provide any value and insight about that client's business. You know what I mean? It's not like they're going to 6 months into it go, "Oh, now I'm going to spend some time learning about your business at a higher level." It's like, no, they're so busy. So it's got to be done right away. And I think that's great advice, getting up to speed, because they can provide more qualitative advice. They can provide more qualitative opportunities. Everybody wins.
Yeah, I think, and when I've been on the brand side hiring agencies, I definitely am making like mental notes how much how much they learned about the business. Not necessarily, oh, we came in with our 3 big creative ideas that we're never going to use, right? I hated doing that stuff on the agency side. It's like, well, you don't know enough to really come up with an idea, but I think so you're showing off probably the same 3 ideas you give to everyone. Cool.
Uh,
So this has been awesome, Lee. We're almost at an hour, but I wanted to end with a question we ask a lot of our guests is, I still think, and you do a lot of this already, but I think all of us in the marketing industry need to do a good job with mentoring people coming into the industry. So I'd love to hear maybe your top 2 or 3 tips for a new marketer, post-college coming into the world, whether they're remote or in person, regardless of sector. Like, what are some things that they can do to have a successful, productive, fulfilling career in our field?
I'll say 2 things. One is, I think it's really well. Gosh, you said mentor, so find a mentor. Find someone that represents where you'd like to be in 10 or 15 years, and find a way to create value for them such that they would want to mentor you. It can come in so many different ways. I know I've seen people get on my radar by they'll do an interview with me, or they'll just ask a question, or some kind of simple exchange like that. And then I'll get to know them a little bit. And then they'll say, "Hey, would you mind spending X amount of time with me once a month or a quarter or whatever?" And it's like, yeah, why not? The other thing though, I would say, you've heard the expression work smart, work hard. Here's the thing. A lot of people in marketing, in other fields too, I suppose, but these days people are phoning it in. They're just kind of skating the surface of. They get out of school and they think, okay, that's now I can just go get a job and just do what they tell me, and that's it. And I think you've got to take it up a notch, right? So marketing especially is an environment, and I've been in marketing 30 years and I'm still learning new stuff every single day. I'm feeding my brain through audio, through text, sometimes video, every single day so I can learn more. And so I guess the hypothesis there is that if a person who's been in this business, has a good business for 30 years, is still doing it, maybe if you've just, started your first marketing job out of college, maybe you should be too. And I think that you've got to look at marketing as a never-ending opportunity to learn. And that can be self-directed learning, can be additional courses, it can be connecting with other smart people that are peers, and using the socials and all the other information sources to help you elevate your capabilities, because other folks are doing that. And it's a very competitive environment for the best jobs, for the best opportunities. And so you might as well, rise to the occasion. The cool thing is that for those people who want to, make a difference in the world, if you solve the revenue problem, the personal revenue problem first, then you'll have a lot more resources to create that impact, create that change that you're looking to make in the world. So that's another thing to think about.
Awesome. Well, Lee, that was super helpful. And as a final plug, Lee's online marketing blog is one of the best resources to not just go in the past and learn about best practices. They have a lot of those, but they continually publish ideas on everything that's happening, whether it's social, AI, everything else. Probably the best industry blog by a company on marketing out there. Because I think your whole team sweats the details of that blog, and it shows. So thank you so much for coming on the Madvertising podcast. I think that was a great episode. Lee, is there anything else you'd like to impart to our guests? Anywhere they can follow you online, or they can see you speak next? Anything else you want to plug?
Sure. I appreciate what you said about the blog, and our blog editor, Lane Ellis, has been doing a great job with the blog, newsletter, agency, social. So props to him about that. So you can find us at toprankblog.com. Following me on the socials, LeeOdden. So whether that's Instagram or Twitter or LinkedIn, those are three places where I spend probably the most time. You can see me as I document my journey at training for my first marathon, and all the crazy food I like to eat. And I'm speaking at B2B Ignite in Chicago coming up here soon. I'll also be speaking at B2B Summit in Paris on June 22nd. And on June 27th, I'll be speaking at B2B Ignite London. So if you happen to be abroad, come see me there.
Nice. Well, enjoy some escargot in Paris and some fish and chips in London.
I will do.
I will be looking for photos online of that, because that sounds like a fun trip. I will have to get overseas too soon. Well, thank you everyone for listening to this week's episode. I hope you got smarter from Lee. I always do when he speaks. Tune in next week. We have more exciting guests to come.
Awesome. Thanks, Adam.